50 years ago, when you were young, or maybe not even born yet, a courageous legislator from Brunswick started out to preserve the Georgia coast. And he did. I'm Paul Bolster. I'm the author of Saving the Georgia Coast. It's a story of how Georgia led the effort to preserve the natural environment along the Atlantic coast. Naturally, everything starts with a threat. And the threat was to dig up Little Tybee Island, Cabbage Island, and the marshes in between. And the Kerr-McGee Company had asked the state for a lease of all that land, 72,000 acres of land that they wanted to dig up and find the phosphate that was under it. Every story obviously has a good guy. Reed Harris was the good guy. Kerr-McGee Company, which put rig after rig of oil mining equipment into the Gulf Coast, was the bad guy. They bought Little Tybee, they bought Cabbage Island, and then wanted the state to lease all the land in between. So Harris and many local people and the scientists that were involved in this, they were opposed to such action. Finally, Lester Maddox decided not to do the lease. He decided to prevent the company from mining the coast. Reed Harris saw that you needed legislation to protect the coast. The scientists had shown that it produced most of the nutrients that supported marine life along the coast. But the story was not a straight line. Legislation is never a straight line. There were 9 public hearings. There were very, very close votes in the House. There were hundreds, or as Lester Maddox described, barrels of letters that were written. There were fledgling environmental organizations like the Sierra Club and the Georgia Conservancy that provided impetus to try to get the legislation passed. Finally, they had to get a governor who was more known for his segregationist stands to sign the bill, and that happened. So the story is interesting, but also the characters are very interesting. The book naturally has lots of people besides Reed Harris who are interested in part of Georgia's political history. One was George Bagby. Bagby was short, stubborn, interesting guy that Maddox appointed to be head of the Game and Fish Commission. Bagby was so much supportive of the legislature that at age 14 he actually came from Paulding County and became a doorman at the legislature and read bills for the clerk. He was also known as the best, he claimed at least, he was the best fisherman in Paulding County. So he was an advisor to Maddox over environmental issues. The other person, fascinating, was Jane Yarn. She was a socialite from North Atlanta whose husband led a plastic surgery group at Preborn Hospital. She was connected to the garden clubs and got the garden clubs to do massive letter writing campaigns in behalf of the legislation. There were others. There was the head of the Georgia Water Quality Control Commission, R.S. Rock Howard, who was a boxing champ and an engineer who stuck his neck out for the legislation. Then there were the many scientists of Sapelo who walked the halls of the House and walked the halls of the Capitol, buttonholing legislators and writing scientific papers on the value of the marsh and the value of the legislation. So I have a PhD in history, and I've used my research skills to plow through all the Georgia archives and all the resources that are out there. But also, I spent 12 years in the legislature, so I have tremendous empathy for the members of the legislature who worked on and passed this legislation, and I hope that comes out in the book. Some of the stories that are in there, one of the things is about the independence of the legislature. That happened during this time period. Instead of being under the thumb of the governor, they appointed their own speaker, the speaker appointed their own chairs, people decided who was going to be on what committees. It wasn't the governor doing that anymore. So the independence movement is important. There are a number of other things that I would like to talk to you about in future talks, and we could perhaps do those again. That gives a little more of the details of some of these stories. But why should you be interested in this story? Why interest today after 50 years? And the reason is that the coast is still threatened by a number of issues. One of them is sea rise. What's going to happen if the marshland is underwater? Another one is mining. There's still mining proposals out there to get at special, very rare and expensive minerals that are on the coast. We also will learn the lessons of how the legislature took on a problem, developed hearings, developed a legislation, and passed that legislation. So there are kind of 4 points here in conclusion. First of all, I'd love to hear from you, and my email address is bolsterp@bellsouth.net. Kind of an old term, but still folks remember Bell South. bolsterp@bellsouth.net. Second, Acapella Books will provide free delivery. They've stocked the book and are glad to deliver it during this time of social distancing. And thirdly, this book is available from all the other sites like Amazon and IndieBound Books and Barnes & Noble. And finally, I'd like to get started an effort to people find other documentation that I couldn't find. There are papers from Jane Yarn that are missing. The Wildlife Federation doesn't have papers that are available. So maybe there are people who have boxes of dusty old files up in their office that might be up in their attic that might come forward and be able to fill in some of the gaps that I wasn't able to fill in. And finally, I hope maybe we can have some more of these chats that will interest you in the book. Thanks very much for listening.